Welcome to HG'd with your boy Keas here on the Back Talk Bros channel. On today's episode of HG'd, we're going to address the Orlando Brown Jr. pros and cons, the arguments as I've heard them. Join with us and let us know what your conclusion is.
Y'all ready for them Chiefs? Y'all ready for them Chiefs? Let's go!
So, we are at the point of this filming, we are about 28 hours or so away from the deadline for Orlando Brown Jr. to come to an agreement with the Kansas City Chiefs on a contract extension. So, we're going to start with the pro arguments. Pro argument number one is the relative value argument. Orlando Brown Jr. is important to the Chiefs. We have to sign him to an extension because he is important, because of the importance of who he blocks for. In other words, because Orlando Brown Jr. blocks for the number one quarterback in the NFL, a $500 million player, he blocks his blind side. He is the most important piece on the offensive line. Therefore, he deserves to get paid according to that. He's blocking for the best quarterback in the NFL at the most premium position on the offensive line. Therefore, he deserves to be paid as the top left tackle in the NFL. And I mean no disrespect by this analogy, but it's the best analogy that I can think of. A carport is a carport no matter what car is parked underneath it. Whether I have a 1978 Ford piece of junk, whether I have a rusted out 2000 Buick Sable, or a 2020 whatever Ferrari, it doesn't matter. It doesn't change the value of that carport. You see, that carport is still in charge of protecting the car no matter what. But it doesn't become a $50,000 carport simply because the value of a Ferrari is hundreds upon hundreds of $1,000s more than that 1978 piece of crap Ford. The carport is worth whatever the carport is worth, not relative to the value of what car it's protecting, but simply because of the value of the carport itself. Now, don't get lost up in the nuance, right? Because, of course, you don't want a carport protecting a Ferrari. That's a totally different argument. That's an argument amongst fans and spectators over how good Orlando Brown Jr. is, and that's not what we're here for. I am giving a hyperbolic example here. Basically, a satirical answer here to prove how absolutely ridiculous the relative value argument is. Of course, Orlando Brown Jr. isn't worth more because of the quarterback that he protects. The quarterback who he protects. If he was, you would see, regardless of how talented they were, you would see the Chiefs left tackle be the highest paid. You would see Josh Allen's left tackle be one of the top 2 or 3 left tackles paid. You would see Justin Herbert's, well, he can't yet because he's only a sophomore player this year, but you get the drift here. And Rashawn Slater actually happens to be one of the top regardless. But you get where I'm going with this. Joe Burrow's left tackle would be one of the highest paid. Go on and on and on. There are situations where there's a great quarterback and they actually have a great left tackle because teams who have great quarterbacks actually want to protect them. Green Bay Packers with David Bakhtiari. You have Tom Brady and the Buccaneers. Great tackles on both sides there. right? When the Saints still had Drew Brees, they had Tron Armstead. So yes, sometimes teams get great left tackles, Tyron Smith, and they have a great quarterback. But oftentimes, some of the highest paid tackles actually play for teams with bad quarterbacks, or they just play for bad teams because bad teams are generally have to overpay at positions to get players to come there in free agency or to stay when they get to the point that their rookie contract can be renegotiated. So that's part of it. There's a lot that goes into it. Argument number 2, the leverage argument. Brown is important because the drop-off in options after him that the Chiefs have, it's a huge drop-off. It's Orlando Brown Jr. or what? Some kind of free agent option out there. There's not much in trade. And if you talk to some people, people who probably haven't really even scouted college football, there's no top left tackles that the Chiefs can depend on being able to draft next year. But even if they could, well, so what? That doesn't help us this year. We have to keep Patrick Mahomes protected this year. Have you not seen Super Bowl 55? Do you not remember Mike Rimmers playing left tackle, people? Come on. There's only one option, and it's Orlando Brown Jr. If it's not Orlando Brown Jr., Patrick Mahomes is going to get killed. The drop-off between him and the next guy, whoever that guy may be, whether it's Prince Tega Winogo or it is Garen Christensen or Darian Kennard, who has yet to play a down and many thought was going to be a right guard who has been getting reps at right tackle would slide over to left tackle. Like, are you crazy? We have no other option but to pay Orlando Brown Jr. whatever he wants because the drop-off between him and the next guy that we have as an option is way too big. It's simply this. We don't negotiate with terrorists. In addition to that, Brett Veach has plans B through Z. He has multiple plans operating under the assumption that Orlando Brown Jr. would not come to an agreement on an extension and would play on the franchise tag. He has multiple plans for that scenario. He has multiple plans for the scenario where Orlando Brown Jr. refuses to play on the franchise tag. He does. He's had a whole year. He has contingency plans for each of these scenarios and any other scenario that we haven't even thought of. Brett Veach and his staff is thorough. I can guarantee you, even if there's a drop-off in play at left tackle, that the Chiefs are prepared to go with it, and they have players on the roster that they feel at least okay with. I can guarantee you that. They did get Garen Christensen, who played left tackle for the Texans last year. He has experience playing both left tackle and right tackle, and when Laramie Tunsil got injured, Garen Christensen filled in for him, so he has that experience. He's on our roster. He's been taking those left tackle snaps in Orlando Brown Jr.'s absence. There are plans. They could have trade plans as well. I have no idea, but I do know they have plans, and I do know that they have a level of comfort in those plans. And since we're a good 26, 28 hours away from that extension deadline, I think it's safe to assume that as long as they're holding fairly tough with their line in the sand, that they're comfortable with that. All right, let's go on to argument number 3. The age argument. Orlando Brown Jr. is 26 years old. The guy who got the biggest contract for a left tackle is Trent Williams, and he's, 32, 33 years old? He is way older than Orlando Brown Jr., and if he can get a contract like that, even if Orlando Brown Jr. doesn't have his athleticism, even if Orlando Brown Jr. has never came close to having a season, like a season or displaying the kind of talent that Trent Williams has, Orlando Brown Jr. is much, much younger. So because he's much younger, and because he's even younger than some of these other guys whose contracts he may want to top, he deserves to get that money. He's 26 years old. Age is also why Orlando Brown Jr. cannot hold out this season. He's 26 years old. Offensive linemen are only going to have so many prime years. They're only going to have so many years to get paid. He's going to be making more on the tag this year than he's made in his whole career. He can't throw away his age 26 season because he wants 5 or 6 years or 4 years, or he wants $70 million guaranteed, whatever the case is. So he can't hold out this year. Or, I mean, he can. He literally can. But it would not be in his best interest to do so. Yes, he could get injured, but he could also be throwing a year away of his prime. And he's also going to be throwing away a very pivotal year to prove to people that he is worth the kind of money he's asking for. Because if he doesn't get an extension, his options are to sign the tag and play, to hold out and not play, or what? If he signs his tag and he plays at a very high level, guess what? He's making even more money. He's making at least what he's asking for this year, if not more. That's good for him. At this point in his career, he should want 2 good-sized contracts. 2 contracts that are probably going to be, realistically, 3 years each. Most every one of these left tackle contracts is made to be around a 3-year deal. Like, basically, that's it. Everything after that is fluff. They're basically made to be a 3-year deal. He should want to get to that 3-year deal as quickly as possible. And so if he's franchise tag and they don't come to an agreement, you get $16.5 million this year, and you get your 3-year deal. As opposed to what? Setting out this year, getting $0 this year, and then getting your 3-year deal. You've got to make sure that 3-year deal nets you at least $16.5 million more over those 3 years to make up for that this year. But in addition to that, the Chiefs can tag him again next year. And guess what? Next year's tag hit would only be $20 million. That's less than the average annual value he's reportedly asking for of $25 million. The Chiefs have leverage here. They could tag him the next 2 years, whether they tag him this year and then tag him and trade him next year, or what. You can't compare his situation to most other players who've been franchise tagged, even disenfranchised players like Le'Veon Bell. Le'Veon Bell held out the second year he was franchise tagged by the Steelers. He was also, 28, 29 years old? He was on the way down. Running backs have like 5 good years. He had his good years. The Steelers ran him into the ground. And they weren't willing to give him a long-term deal. He was going to get good money to play that final season, but he held out, and it hurt him. but he wasn't giving up a prime year. He was giving up a lot of money for 1 year, but it was a year where there's a great possibility that he had already hit his peak and was starting to come down. Totally different situation than Orlando Brown Jr., who would be giving up a year of prime. Maybe one of the best years he could possibly have. That wasn't the case with Lev Bell. Trent Williams himself was a completely different situation. He was actually a free agent. The 49ers, he wasn't on a franchise tag with them. He was a straight up free agent. That's why he got more money. There was no team with the leverage of a franchise tag. Argument number 4. The upside argument. Not only is he only 26 years old, but and not only is he finally taking training as a left tackle seriously this offseason, I mean, he's playing tennis and doing all these drills to work on his footwork and his mobility and all of these things. But he also improved throughout the season. You'll hear the numbers about how many pressures, how many sacks, how many hits he gave up. But he got better as the season went on. Doesn't that count for anything? He was in a brand new system. He'd only played like a half a season of left tackle before the Chiefs traded for him. He was a right tackle with the Ravens before Ronnie Stanley got injured. And then the Ravens had to move him to left tackle. He played about a half a season of left tackle, and then the Chiefs traded for him. So he didn't have much time to train to be a left tackle, let alone be a left tackle in the Chiefs system. And so he was playing basically right off the cuff. And he got better in the Chiefs system. He adjusted to Patrick Mahomes' drops. He gave up less pressures. He gave up less sacks. He got better as the season went on last year. That's good enough. That's good enough for us to pay him top left tackle money. The counter argument to that was, 1, go look at the playoff numbers. He actually gave up, I believe, half as many sacks, like 2 sacks in the playoffs, and a good handful of hurries and hits. Like, the playoffs were not pretty. Like, yes, it's a small sample size. It's 3 games. But while he had an upward trajectory as the regular season went on, he got half as many sacks as he gave up during the whole season in 15 or 16 games in just 3. So what do we do with that? The fact of the matter is we got one decent season to look at him in a regular offense, well, a passing offense. He went from one extreme to the other, and yes, you can view that as a positive. But when you're talking about a 4, 5, 6 year extension, and you're talking about making $25 million a year, you got to put more than 1 year on tape, or you at least got to put one super high level year on tape. You can go read some great articles. Seth Kaiser, Chief in the North, has a great article out about the Orlando Brown situation. You can find great arguments that Orlando Brown Jr. isn't even a top 10 left tackle. Some may even say not even a top 15 left tackle. We don't have the tape of him playing at a high level. You take that and you take the having the 2 sacks and an increase in pressure in just 3 playoff games. That's a good counter argument. Did he really get better if, as the season went on and we got to the playoffs, his numbers got worse? Argument number 5 in favor of signing Orlando Brown Jr. to an extension, no matter what he wants. Argument number 5, the precedent argument. This is just how NFL free agency works. Guys want to get paid the most money. Guys who aren't necessarily the top at their positions still get paid top money, or close to top money, or ridiculous money that they haven't proved that they earned yet. Look at the Jaguars' free agency this year. Look at free agency any year. There's always guys that get paid money they don't deserve. So what? But this is just how free agency works. This is how the NFL works. This is how tag situations work. Don't you remember Lev Bell holding out? If the Chiefs don't give Orlando Brown Jr. exactly what he wants, he's likely to hold out. He could hold out. He has some leverage there, because if he holds out, what are the Chiefs going to do at left tackle? Don't you remember the leverage argument? It's a huge drop-off between Orlando Brown Jr. and someone else. So what if he doesn't sign the tag? What if he doesn't sign the tag by the first game of the season? And lets the Chiefs see what life would be like with another left tackle there. Let's see how Mahomes likes that. Let's see how Mahomes likes having a different left tackle, an inferior left tackle there on game 1 of the season. Let's see how he has it when there's no continuity or a lack of continuity, because his starting left tackle for most of the season will be setting out and won't be playing in preseason games and may not be there for game number 1. This is how the NFL works. Brett Veach knows that. Chiefs fans know that. People might as well get over it. Orlando Brown Jr. can do whatever he wants, because NFL players deserve to get paid whatever they want. Actually, contracts are fluff. A good deal of contracts are fluff. I've said it multiple times, but the length of a contract and the annual average of a contract essentially mean nothing. What matters is the guaranteed money, where that guaranteed money is, how it's structured into a contract. That determines the length of the contract. And the length of the contract determines the actual annual average value. We're going to look at contracts like Trent Williams' 6-year, $138 million contract. And we'll see. You'll see what I'm talking about here when we look at that contract, when we look at David Bakhtari's contract, when we look at some of these left tackle contracts, you'll see what I'm talking about here. Number 6, the salary cap argument. Have you seen how much salary cap space the Chiefs have? It's something like $12 or $13 million. They need to get this franchise tag hit off of their books. They need to get it off their books. They need to get it replaced with an extension that will at least reduce his cap hit by half to like $8 million. And then they can roll over some, or they can go out and get someone like Robert Quinn, or another edge rusher that we so desperately need, or another player out there at another position. So we got to do it because we need the cap space. And we're going to need the cap space next year. And what are we going to do? Keep them on the tag this year and have $16 million, $16.5 million eaten up in cap space? And then what are we going to do for next year? He'll be a lot more expensive then. Or if we tag him next year, that's going to be another $20 million in cap space eaten up. And we don't have cap space. So we need to get him signed to a long-term deal, so that we have some security, so we have some continuity, and so that we can plan for other contracts and cap space for 2022, 2023, and 2024 and beyond. The counter argument is that a bad extension hurts the Chiefs. It's as simple as that. We got to see more from them, because a bad extension hurts the Chiefs. It could seriously damage our competitive windows. Now, I'm not saying that he's Frank Clark, But we've seen what Frank Clark's contract has meant to this team and our inability to go sign players that we needed, to offer contract extensions that we needed because Frank Clark was on the books. That's all I'm going to say about that part. The other thing is, again, the way the contract is structured is important. And I'm not sure how you structure a contract that pays out a $25 million annual average value that he is reported to be wanting and seeking and demanding. I'm not sure how you do that in any way that has any semblance of being team friendly in regards to having an escape clause here. And again, when we get to all these left tackle contracts, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about here when I say an escape clause. So for me, that's perhaps the scariest part of this. And the reality is yeah, there's some ways that they can do it. And you'll see what I'm talking about. There's some ways that they can do it. But if these two sides are far apart, what that tells me isn't necessarily that they're really in disagreement about ever getting to a $25 million annual average value. But perhaps what they're arguing about is that Orlando wants a true $25 million annual average value as opposed to one of these fluff ones that basically everybody else has. I could be wrong, but that is my guess, is that the Chiefs want to structure it like all these other fluff contracts, and Orlando wants true money. Maybe he wants both the real money and the bragging rights. And if that's the case, argument number 7 in favor of signing Orlando Brown Jr. to a contract extension. The lost trade value argument. We traded a first round plus to the Ravens for Orlando Brown Jr., so we have to give him an extension. You cannot trade a first round draft pick for a player, have him for a year, and then let him walk. First off, the most we could get in compensation for him in terms of a compensatory pick is an end of the third round pick. That's losing value. We can't do that. That's not how smart teams build their roster. When you give up that first round pick, you are giving it up knowing that you have to sign this guy to an extension. And it's an utter failure on Brett Veach if he traded for Orlando Brown Jr., didn't try to work out an extension right then and there, lets him get to this point where we have to franchise tag him, and then he doesn't play this year. That is very poor GM work, and we can't have that. And this is simply pointing out a logical fallacy here called the sunk cost fallacy. The sunk cost fallacy, the basic idea of it is you spent money on something. You spent value on something. In this case, you spent a first round pick. And so because you spent that on something, you keep throwing money at it. You keep throwing resources at it because you already lost money. And so the feeling is you got to keep throwing money at it until you can make money because you've already lost all this money. Back when probably I was, who knows, maybe 1 or 2, or maybe I wasn't even born yet. There was a movie with Tom Hanks and Shelley Long called, I believe it's called The Money Pit, about a house that they bought and things just kept going wrong with it, things that they had to fix. Right? And I'm not saying that Orlando Brown Jr. is a deceptively terrible house where things are going to go wrong. You could make a case that a 6'6", 6'7" offensive lineman who's 345 pounds, who reportedly played most of this last season at 365 pounds. Maybe his body is going to wear down a lot quicker than a Trent Williams. Maybe you could make the argument that because he has bottom level athleticism, that his age doesn't matter. You put that lack of athleticism with his height and weight, and he has a much lower floor or much lower ceiling because he doesn't have that athleticism or that body type to age well. You could make that argument. But the point is just because we've given a first round doesn't mean that we should continue to be throwing resources at a position, at a player. And the reality is that Brett Veach said himself that what he was expecting, what he believed he gave up as far as value in what he gave up and what he got back, because he gave up an end of the first round pick, right? Essentially a second, but he gave up an endish of the first round pick, and he got a second back. And he believes that he gave up what? I think he said like something, the value ended up between the Ravens giving stuff back and the Chiefs giving their picks, that the value ended up being somewhere around pick number 45. And you can argue that 42, 45. You can argue if he's right or wrong, which trade value chart you're going to use, all of these things. But he said he believed he gave up like pick number 45. So here's the thing. One, even if you get a 1-year rental out of Orlando Brown Jr., is pick number 45 worth it to take a shot at a Super Bowl for 1 year? Maybe. Maybe it is. But if they end up trading him, are you going to tell me we can't get the value of at least pick number 45 back? We're talking about a guy who wants to get paid $25 million a year, wants to reset the tackle market, and we couldn't even get pick 45 back from him? For him? What about the original pick we gave up for him? You don't think we could get that back? If not, why not? Is he not worth it? He thinks he's worth $25 million a year. Are you saying he's not worth it? He's not worth pick 25, 28, 30, 32, let alone pick 45? I think the worst case scenario is he doesn't play this year and the Chiefs trade him next year with pick 32 and they get something around value 40, 45 for him or better. And along with pick 32, they move up and they can get their left tackle, make their big splash with the draft being in Kansas City. Anyway, these are my counter arguments. You can leave in the comments your own arguments for, your arguments against, ones that I missed. But to me, these were the ones that I've heard the most on the pro side, or the ones that made the most sense or were the most impactful one. I want to thank you for watching this episode of HG'd. If you're not a subscriber yet, make sure you hit the subscribe button. Go ahead and give us a like and share if you like this content. I want to thank you for your time in watching this. Don't forget to leave us a comment. Again, let us know, what are your best arguments for or against giving Orlando Brown Jr. an extension. And maybe by the time you see this, we will already know whether Orlando Brown Jr. has signed his extension or if that deadline has passed. And then from there, we'll see if he signs his franchise tag or if he plans to set out. So let us know what you think is going to happen. Let us know what you think should happen. And what arguments do you like the best? Come back next time. Make sure that you catch us every other Thursday night, technically Friday morning, midnight live stream, and Sunday nights in the off season, 7 p.m. And as the season begins, we'll adjust those for game days, and we'll let you know about those. Anyway, I want to thank you for watching this video of the Backtalk Bros channel. We'll see you next time.
You got your team, and we got a kingdom. Ready for war, we score at will.